one of the things that I was thinking about yesterday driving my car around was why are cars so expensive today? Um, there's a couple reasons that I'll get into, but I can tell you that the number one reason is not inflation. Um, but to kind of set the stage, let's go back and look at um, where cars were, regulation that was put in place by certain administrations, and then look at the outcomes of those on kind of the broader auto industry. Um, so to about 1985, cars hit about an average of 27.5 miles per gallon. And that was pretty consistent until about 2010. Um, it was 19 to 22 miles per gallon for light trucks into in the 2000s, early 2000s. And then around 2007, EISA, or the Energy Independence Security Act, was put in place that had set a goal of setting fleet emissions. This is the average, or not emissions, but fleet mile per gallon. And this is the average across all of the vehicles produced, or the different models being produced, at 35 miles per gallon by 2020. Um, Again, from 2007 to 2020, it's a pretty long time. That gives auto manufacturers a significant amount of time to get to those goals, which, in my personal opinion, they probably would have gotten to anyways, given the price of gas at the time and just the demand for vehicles that were more efficient anyways. But then in comes the Obama administration, and they got really aggressive with uh, miles per gallon standards. And so they set goals that for 2016 models, for passenger cars, they needed to be at 36.5 miles per gallon, and then light trucks needed to be between 28 to 29, with a combined fleet average of 34 miles per gallon. Then that was upped, I think 5%. It's supposed to raise 5% every year. But then 2017 models needed to be at a fleet average of 35 miles per gallon plus. By 2020, they needed to be at 40 miles per gallon plus. And then by the 2025 target, they wanted cars to be at 49 to 54 miles per gallon equivalent, but across the combined fleet, right? This is significant. If you look at the standards that were put in place by ESA, 35 miles per gallon is a pretty big jump from 27.5 when you're averaging that across the entire fleet. And so, what did that do? That forced auto manufacturers to have to come up with ways to reduce their fleet miles per gallon by doing interesting things that ultimately led to the more complex vehicles. Number one on that list is hybrid vehicles. And so instead of having just a gasoline powered powertrain, now you're implementing an electronic assist into that. So via an electric engine. And there are different ways that it was done. There were some that were essentially on electric, and then they would kick on they would be on electric. They could run probably 50 miles on electric. But if you needed additional power, kick the engine on. Others were a naturally aspirated car or a turbocharged car. Then it was getting an assist from the electric engine. So it required less gas, less fuel to actually get up to speed. But there are a couple of different hybrid systems that were put out, um, but those hybrid systems again added a lot of complexity to the car, and they also made the cars more expensive by adding in batteries, by adding in electric engines or electric motors. You're adding to the baseline cost of the car. Before it was just a petrol engine. Now it's a petrol engine plus all these other additional accessories. Um, it also led to additional electronics around or electronics and filters around the exhaust system to reduce the emissions, which was also part of this broader thing as well, which added to the complexity of the cars. That also led to what I would say was a good thing, which was more diesel cars being offered within the US. If you've ever traveled to Europe and rented a car or gotten any car there, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a diesel powered car. The reason why that is number one, gas is very expensive per liter there. If you look at the per liter cost, I mean, it's like I feel like it's the same. It's either the same as California, or if not, I think it's actually more than California as far as the per gallon. But they make gas very expensive there. So what do people do? They buy diesel cars, and so diesel cars are everywhere, from small two-door cars all the way up to Econoline vans. Diesel runs the gambit. Whenever I was traveling there, I always wondered why there weren't more diesel cars in America. And then we started to see, more diesel cars being offered. Volkswagen, Mercedes, BMW, Audi to a certain extent, although there weren't as many diesel Audis, but there was a ton of diesel Volkswagens. My mom had a diesel Jetta. But one of the things that happens with diesel is that they emit a lot of carbon. And so while that doesn't go into the atmosphere, it does go in the ground. So if you've been around like New York City and walked the streets for a day and then wipe your face later, you'll find that you're just covered in carbon. Like it's literally everywhere. It's on the subways, from all the from the brakes that are used to stop the trains to the buses that are running around or were for the longest time before they went to natural gas. But at any rate, diesel is a very dirty from a ground level, but from the atmosphere perspective, not as bad, whatever. But the point is then these auto manufacturers had to put in cheats in order to reduce the amount of carbon output from them. This is where Dieselgate comes from, and ultimately why Volkswagen had to buy my mom's car back, which ultimately led her to get a really nice car because they were giving a lot of money to buy all those cars back. But this was a problem amongst all of it wasn't just Volkswagen, by the way. It was BMW, it was Mercedes. They were all doing the same thing. And by the way, they were also doing the same thing for their performance cars, one of which I happen to own. But they created a way to, for the car to know when it's being tested versus driving regularly, so that it would lower its emissions for the test and then go back up when you started driving regularly. Like it would know that it was being tested. I'm sure it was probably something as simple as, hey, if an OBD or if something's plugged into the OBD port, on board diagnostic port, which is done for testing, and the car is stationary and the gas is bright, like these things have to have. At any rate, they were all cheating as well, and then updates were pushed out to all of the vehicles over the last few years to change the software so that it would no longer do that. But essentially, these regulations that were pushed onto these audio manufacturers force them to add a lot of things to the car that made them more expensive. Whether it was the emissions lowering because the standards there had changed, or like California was setting some crazy standards, and you want to be able to sell cars in California, then you just standardize that across the US. Um, then there was, miles per gallon, which then added hybrid systems, which made the cars more complex and more expensive. Um, and by the way, so the average cost for a car in 2007, pre a lot of these heavy regulations going in, was between 23 and $28,000 a year, depending on the car. Like if you were shopping for a Honda, like a Honda Civic or a Toyota Corolla, like you probably remember spending roughly about 16K to 17K for those baseline cars. Um, Now, if you fast forward to 2026, current day, the average price for a car is between $49,000 and $50,000. If you look at like used cars from the same time period, so like 2007, um, looking at between a 10,000 to 18,000 average for a used car at the time, versus 25 to 30K today for a used car. Same rough amount of years old, same rough amount of features, and so on and so forth. And so that market is driven by the high cost to buy new, right? If new cars are selling for more, then obviously you need to price your own vehicle used at a rate in which makes sense for people to buy. So if the average car in 2007 was, let's say, $23,000, it makes sense as to why used cars are going between 10 and 18 on average, because that was a reasonable price to spend and it was competitive. Now, the entire um, pricing point is so much higher, so you can actually demand more for used cars, because there's less of them, and also because if you want to buy a new car, this is the price. If you want to buy a used car, this is what I'm willing to put on the market for. But also, what it did is it brought in EVs. And there's two different sides. I mentioned this in um, another blog about, or I say to say vlog, um, about policy outcomes, and you know, at any rate, there's kind of two different um, segments of the EV market. There's Tesla, Lucid, Rivian, and then there's the rest of the auto manufacturers, and this could be Volvo, Volkswagen, Toyota, GM, Ford. These EVs are not the same. What Tesla, Lucid, and Rivian are putting out is not the same as what's being put out by traditional auto manufacturers. There's a whole, I mean, I could probably spend a lot of time talking about why traditional auto manufacturers are failing, um, in competing specifically in the EV segment. But let's just say, let's just kind of keep it easy to explain. One, the EV market wouldn't exist today without Tesla. Um, Tesla has created a car that people actually want to buy. Um, and so has Lucid to a certain extent, and so has Rivian with their trucks, and their SUVs, right? And so, but these are also companies that don't have the baggage of traditional petrol engines, that are supporting their business. These companies, Tesla, Lucid, Rivian, I'm focusing on those because those are the ones predominantly sold in the US that are EV only. There's a bunch of other manufacturers out there like NIO, and there's a bunch of them, but I'm just going to keep it to the US. So Tesla went through the kind of hurdles of getting to economies of scale. Lucid and Rivian are slowly kind of getting there. The benefit for them is that they're starting to produce more vehicles, which means that they're having to order more parts and do this, that, and the other, which is giving them the ability to negotiate better pricing with their vendors, in which they buy a lot of their parts for that are put into their vehicles. Tesla, on the other hand, while it does outsource a bit, does a lot of in-house. The most expensive components within Teslas are in-house designed, um, and a lot of them are built in-house. When you talk about having essentially a three-piece body structure, which is a front mold, a rear mold connected to the battery pack. Those are hundreds, in some cases, thousands of pieces that are now broken down into three. So there's a lot of efficiencies that are in the new kind of EV space. This is where the traditional auto manufacturers kind of fall off. So the easiest way to say this is for every Tesla, Lucid, or Rivian that's sold is a vehicle that will no longer be maintained, won't be bought, will no longer be maintained, and will not have the necessity for parts for traditional auto manufacturers. And so when Tesla sells a million vehicles, or 1.5 or 2 million vehicles, those are vehicles that are no longer sold by traditional auto manufacturers. Traditional auto manufacturers, and the reason why I say this, are leveraging economies of scale in order to bring down their overall costs. And so as these other EV manufacturers ramp and sell more vehicles, the headache and pain is going to continue to hit on these traditional auto manufacturers that are trying to move into the EV space because of these fuel regulations and building not great cars, not great looking cars, and cars that people want to buy. And so they're forcing themselves to lose money on that endeavor because they're building and producing, I should say, more importantly, producing fewer of them. So the parts costs are so high because they don't share necessarily parts similar with their broader fleet. The broader fleet is losing money because now they're selling less of those vehicles, which means that the parts cost is going to go up because now these vendors are producing less of those parts. It's just how it works, right? And so without all this overlay or kind of overriding policy and architecture that has been put out over the last 15 years, sans both Trump administrations, which rolled all of that stuff back. What you have are auto manufacturers trying to fit a square peg through a round hole, while you have EV only manufacturers ramping. And so I think the EV manufacturers, I could say this definitely for Tesla, would exist regardless of regulation. Because again, they're producing products that people want to buy. But would the traditional auto manufacturers have made themselves vulnerable by having to hire all new teams to design EVs, to then build EVs, which require different lines of production and different facilities? Would they have done all that stuff had these regulations not gone into place? Probably not. They probably would have just focused on making their vehicles more and more efficient. Just my personal opinion. But all of that additional cost, right? The cost to build these hybrid systems or to, build these new EVs from companies that are traditionally gas powered powertrain manufacturers, has ballooned the cost of vehicles. And now when you go out to buy a car, you're looking at, a 7-year loan on that car because it's just so expensive and you need to get the payments within a place that you feel comfortable, right? And so I just thought it was interesting. I've been wanting to buy a new car. I'm a big Volkswagen Audi person. But the car that I bought in 2014, brand new, ordered from a manufacturer, that same car today now costs $30,000 more. And so I may not end up getting a new car for a while until I really need to justify it, because the additional cost to the household is it's ridiculous. It's like if you have a car that's paid off, and it gets pretty good gas mileage and you enjoy it, why get another one? That's kind of where I'm at today. That's what kind of got me thinking about why are cars so expensive today. But at any rate, if you like this kind of content, like, share, and subscribe, and keep believing the best for America is still ahead. Peace out.